Hello, welcome to this breakout session. My name is Ian Hatton and I'm a pre-sales consultant for Zebra EMEA, based in the UK, but covering the EMEA market. And my talk today is about securing Zebra Android devices and methods to do that in order to minimize any risk of hacking devices, which obviously can occur. The agenda we're going to follow is that I'm just going to do a quick overview of why security is an issue. I think most people know that, but it's just some positioning on that. And then we're going to look at lots of different options for improving the lockdown of our devices using our MX layer, which is the layer that we add on to Android in order to provide more enterprise features. And that's going to cover things like whitelisting, disabling safe boot, disabling Gboard, locking notification bar, and so on. We're also going to then look and focus on how we can use Enterprise Home Screen, which is a Zebra free of charge utility, in order to lock down the device and to prevent users from exiting the pre-approved set of applications that they're allowed to use. So that's the agenda. Moving straight on, the overview slide here just shows that security has become, a major consideration for enterprise customers purchasing any devices which are networked, especially mobile devices, because mobile device, by its nature, can be left anywhere and basically is more vulnerable than something that was on premise, like a PC, for example. So this slide just groups the threats into different categories. You've got downloadable application threats, which is primarily malware and spyware. You've got network and Wi-Fi security threats. So that's things like network exploits, Wi-Fi sniffing, cross-platform attacks. You've got general cybersecurity threats, so phishing, social engineering, drive-by downloads, browser flaws, OS flaws, and you've got physical threats, which is the actual threat of somebody taking a device, especially a mobile device, and basically trying to hack that once they obtain the device. So there's other data that you can look at, which basically categorizes the threats, and you can see here from this slide that most of the mobile malware targets are for Android phones. So 98% basically target Android, only 2% iOS. So that's probably a reflection, A, of the fact that Android has a much larger installed base in terms of numbers, and B, because iOS has got a tighter security model in terms of controlling how applications can run on the device. So although Android has improved a lot over the last several generations of the OS, and probably in Android 11 is broadly comparable with iOS, certainly on the earlier generations of Android, there were lots more vulnerabilities that could be exploited. And because it's such a large user base, that was a big target for malware. There's also an investigation that indicated that 92% of malware is delivered by email. So just by the fact that, on most of our devices, we don't have email running, that obviously closes down that as a large security hole. So that's good news, I guess. And the final point is that 58% of attack victims are small businesses, where I guess really you don't have the same resources to actually spend on locking down devices. So it tends to be a larger proportion of small companies which are targeted. Big companies obviously are vulnerable as well. So the remainder of that portion is big companies, and obviously the potential gain for a hacker on a large company is potentially much larger if you target a large organization. So that gives you some detail about exactly how that breaks down. Top 5 reasons hackers target mobile devices. Got stealing credentials from and passwords. Obviously, that allows them to access either applications or the network, obtain company data, conduct reconnaissance, get access to the corporate network, and deliver malware. So that's basically gives you an idea of what people are looking for when they're hacking devices. And in order to meet this kind of threat, general threat level that's out there, we have got some tips here and tools really that you can use to improve the lockdown of our devices. And what I've done really is to put these together into a single download file that you can access on this URL. And basically you can just download the zip file, unzip the files to a folder, which you can name whatever you want, like security tools, for example. And then you should have this folder structure here. And there's a separate zip file for the folder gen EHS, which you need to unzip to that particular folder. So in the end, you'll get this folder structure that you can use in order to use the same utilities that we're going to run through now. Just to note, these tools are unofficial and unsupported, so use at your own risk. Obviously, they are using basically MX features, which is completely supported, but the actual tools I put together, some of the batch files and so on that you'll see being used are not officially supported. So one of the easiest things you can do in order to lock down our devices very easily is to create a whitelist of applications which are allowed to run on the device. And that basically allows you to specify which user installed apps can be run on the device. So it can't change the pre-installed system apps, which will always be allowed, but it allows you for any user installed apps to say, for example, once I've installed my apps, I don't want to allow any others to be installed. So once you configure a whitelist that lists your allowed apps, then any app not on the list will be blocked for installation via any method. And what that does is it ensures that non-approved apps are not installed on the device either by side loading or through any other method. So you can see here, for example, in this case, that with a whitelist enabled, if you try and push or install an application via ADB, Android Debug Bridge, then you get an install failed user restricted message. And that will be the same regardless of the method that you use to try and install the application. You'll still get that application blocked. So once you enable the whitelist, then obviously it gives you quite a good level of lockdown. And to enable whitelisting in MX, we use the Access Manager CSP. The actual XML code to do that, you can see here. You can also do it through StageNow as well. If you prefer to use StageNow, build a profile. For the purposes of this demonstration and this talk, we're going to use XML because it's easier to automatically build XML using some tools and to create a whitelist automatically, which is basically what I've tried to do here is to simplify the creation of a whitelist and to therefore make it more easily used and more widely deployed. So basically, though, in Access Manager, you just specify the package names of the applications that you want to whitelist, and anything that's not on that list that you try and install or is already installed will be disabled. And in order to disable the whitelist, then you just use Access Manager and set the operation mode to 1. So 2 is enable and 1 is disable. And to demonstrate this, I've just put together a batch file which will automatically create a whitelist.xml file, which will look exactly the same as this, but will have names of the currently installed applications in this line. So it's going to build that for you automatically. So the way it works is it just queries the connected device via ADB to get the package names of the apps already installed. And then it just generates this whitelist.xml, which you can then install via MX, and it will add those pre-installed apps to the whitelist and block installation of any others. So once you've done that, in order to process the XML, you can either include it in a Stage Now profile using the batch CSP, or you can send it directly to the device using the utility which I've posted at this blog link. And this utility just allows you basically to take raw XML, push it onto the device and process it immediately. So really it's using the batch CSP, but it's just giving you a sort of simple UI in order to push the XML to the device. And that's what we're going to use for this demonstration. So we can also persist the whitelist. So there's a persist manager step at the end of the XML profile, which is commented out by default. But if you want to make sure that when you do an enterprise reset that your whitelist is still in place, which is a good idea, then you just uncomment the persist step and that will persist it over an enterprise reset. And the disable whitelist.xml will just remove the whitelist restrictions and allow you to install any additional apps. So I'm just going to demonstrate this to you now quickly on my device. I just switch to a background. So firstly, I'll just show you my device. This is a TC57 running Android 10. At the moment, it's basically in the out-of-box condition. It's got no apps installed apart from Visor. So first thing I'm going to do is just to install some applications. So I come to my folder, go to whitelist. Well, let me just install some demo files first. So I'm going to install Enterprise Browser, this license installer app, and the Zebra Print setup utilities. And what I'm doing here is just I'm pushing them via ADB onto the device and installing them. So I've just got a shortcut set up to do that so that I don't have to type in the commands. And you should see that they'll appear on the device. So that's the printer setup appearing, Enterprise Browser, and that's the license installer app. So those are installed. So now if I go back to my whitelist folder, then in order to generate the whitelist, I just have to run this batch file. So I'm going to do that just from a command prompt. So I'll go into that folder. And run gen whitelist. And that should then pull the package names from the device and put them into the whitelist.xml file. So if I edit that now, you can see in here, those are the package names of the 3 apps that I've installed, and that's also the Visor app as well. And so that XML now is ready to push onto the device. So to do that, I'm going to use my utility. I'm going to get that file that we just generated. As you can see here, I'm going to push it onto the device, and I'm going to then start Stage Now. I'm going to read the barcode to process that XML, and now my whitelist should be installed. So what that means now then is if I go back to take another application, so in this case I've got Total Commander File Explorer. If I try and push that onto the device and install it, then you should see that I get the install failed user restricted message, because that whitelist is now in place and it's blocking any additional app installation. So that's pretty easy to do. If I want to disable the whitelist, I just take that code. I haven't persisted it, so I don't actually need that step there. You just take that out, so that might generate an error. Push that onto the device, start stage now again, read the barcode, and now my whitelist should be disabled. So if I then repeat that application install, then you should see that it will install correctly. And it is there. So that was a quick demonstration of how to generate and enable a whitelist. Let me just resume the slides. So second demonstration is safe mode, or disabling safe mode. So safe mode is a standard Android feature, which is designed as a recovery option in the case that the device malfunctions due to a user installed app, for example, which has caused a problem. The idea is that you can restart the device and boot into safe mode, and it will allow you to do a recovery of that device, any data on that device. The problem is that it also allows you to change settings of the device, which you don't really want to happen when the device is in the field. And it's very easy to access. You just access it through the power key menu. And so what we're recommending is that the safe mode is disabled on devices in the field. And we can do that through MX Power Key Manager with the hide safe mode option. So you can see here the XML to do this. We've got disable safe mode. We use Power Key Manager and we set safe mode to a value of 2, and enable safe mode. And I just realized I've got a typo in my slide. That should be safe mode is 1. So just fix that as we go. So yeah, basically you need to push this XML to disable safe mode. And then what that means is when you do that, just drop out of here and just show you the XML applied to the device. So if I go safe mode disable, show you the screen of the device. Basically, when you hit the power key menu and you hit restart, by default, you get this pop-up reboot safe mode. So that's if you press and hold on the restart icon. So if I push this disable to the device, process it, then now when I do the power key menu and hit restart, you can see there's no pop-up. So I've disabled the access to safe mode through that pop-up message. And if I want to re-enable it, just change that back to 1, push it onto the device. On stage now again. And now it should be re-enabled. So yeah, it's very easy to do, but very good thing to disable that on devices in the field. In a similar way to disabling safe mode, some customers may prefer to disable Gboard because there are some data security concerns about using Google Gboard. There's a blog that I put together here which gives more information about that. But basically, you have the option to either use an open source alternative keyboard. And when I say open source, the source code is actually published on GitHub. So you can check it, to make sure it's not doing anything that you don't want it to do. And we can use MX to set this OpenBoard keyboard as the default input method, which will allow it to be used for keyboard input. And we can also disable Gboard. And that will work on everything, on every OS version. But if you have Android 10 or later, then we have the Google AOSP keyboard pre-installed but disabled by default. So you can actually use on Android 10 and 11, you can use the AOSP keyboard, which is just a basic keyboard, and very similar to OpenBoard. So there's two options there, depending on the OS version you're using. If you want to use the OpenBoard method, then basically you install the APK for OpenBoard, and then you just disable Gboard and set OpenBoard as the default UI, sorry, default keyboard input. And you can see here, that's how it looks. So it looks pretty much identical to the AOSP keyboard anyway. And for using AOSP keyboard, slightly more complex in that you have to firstly enable the AOSP keyboard, because as I said, it's disabled by default. You then have to do a delay of actually quite a few seconds. We've got it set to 9 seconds here. The reason for that is because it takes a while for the keyboard to be enabled and to be installed. So you have to have a delay here. And then we can use the UI manager to set the AOSP keyboard as default. And finally, we can disable the Google Gboard. So just to show you that quickly on the device, if you look here at the moment, I've got should have the Gboard installed. You can see it's got the swipe functionality. So if I go to here and select the code to set the AOSP keyboard and push that onto the device, start stage now, read the barcode to process the XML, then you'll see it will take a while because it's got to do this delay in order to enable the Gboard, but enable AOSP. But now you can see I've lost my Gboard functionality, and this is set the AOSP keyboard as default, and there's no option to select Gboard. So it's a very easy way to switch away from Gboard for the default input. Let me just, if I want to go back to Gboard, I can just re-enable Gboard as an application on the device. So I just push that code, start stage now, read the barcode, and now you should find that Gboard is there again. Actually, I haven't set it as a default, so I need to do that manually, but it should allow me to select Gboard again. So that's quite straightforward to do. Let's minimize that. Back to the slides. So other options for improving lockdown are that you can lock down the notification bar settings access. So by default on an Android device, you just can pull down the notification bar from the top of the screen. That allows access to settings through the gear icon and or the quick access icons. And with MX, we can take these UI elements out and just present a basic slider for the display contrast or display brightness. So it doesn't allow the user any access to the settings via the notification bar. And to do that, again, fairly straightforward XML to basically disable or keep the pull down enabled, because you still want to allow the users to see incoming notifications, but it allows you to disable the settings icon and the icons, the quick launch icons. So that will disable, and you can see disable is a value of 2, and if you want to re-enable, set them to 1. So yeah, good idea to do that. Would prevent users from accessing those settings in that way. Another method is to remove general access to settings. So after you disable shortcut access to settings via notifications, you can provide access to specific settings using an app which calls the required intent or the required setting via an intent. And there's a list of the settings intents available here. So that allows access only to settings which are relevant and allowed for the user. So an example of that would be if you wanted to allow, so you've disabled the pull down of the notification bar, but you want to allow access to the Bluetooth settings so you can pair a Bluetooth device. So you can access the intent required for the Bluetooth settings at that link, and then you can just make a little app which will just call that intent and will allow the user then only to access the Bluetooth settings. Another feature which is, as far as I've seen, is exclusive to Zebra is the ability to enable restricted GMS mode. So this allows us to disable most of the GMS apps, including Play. So GMS stands for Google Mobile Services. That's all the applications that Google adds on top of the pure vanilla AOSP Android. And what we can do with restricted GMS is to disable all the GMS apps, or we can disable them all apart from either Maps, Chrome, push messaging, or all three. So because those are commonly used by enterprise applications, especially Google Maps and push messaging, then we do allow those to be selectively left enabled. So we can lock down all the other GMS features or disable all the other GMS features, but we can still have the key core ones enabled. So good idea to do that. If you're not using GMS apps and services, for sure, it's a good idea to enable restricted GMS, and it will prevent any possibility that users could access things like the Play Store or any of the other GMS applications. And we mentioned persisting settings briefly when I was talking about whitelisting. So any lockdown settings can be made to persist over an enterprise reset. And it's a good idea to do that, because if you don't persist settings, then somebody could potentially get a device, they could enterprise reset a device, and if it doesn't restore its lockdown state, then that will allow them to access that device and its contents. So persistence is provided by the enterprise folder, which is preserved during an enterprise reset, and it's enabled by adding the persist manager step at the end of any staging profile. So whenever you put a persist manager step at the end of the profile, everything above that will be persisted. So it ensures that the lockdown settings are automatically reapplied when the device reboots, and any user apps and persistent settings are cleared after a factory reset, apart from any data stored on the plug-in SD card. So that means if somebody basically got hold of a device, if you persist your lockdown, then they won't be able to access it after an enterprise reset. If they do a factory reset, then everything's cleared from the device anyway, including all its Wi-Fi and network configuration. But if you had a plug-in SD card, then that will be preserved. So any data that was on that card should be encrypted if you don't want people to access it. And that just shows the XML required to enable and disable the persist functionality. Okay, so moving on to Enterprise Home Screen, this is our free-to-use kiosk application for Zebra devices. This is primarily used by customers who are not using an EMM, because if you use EMM tools like SOTI or AirWatch, then those have their own kiosk launcher applications that you can enable from the EMM console. So this is really more targeted to non-EMM users, but it allows us to do the same sort of things in terms of restricting access to settings and non-approved apps. We can auto launch processes when EHS starts following a reset, and it can be configured to run a single app if only one customer app is required. So that is like a true kiosk mode where you say, for example, I only want to run Chrome when the device boots up, and when EHS starts, it will just run Chrome and you won't see a menu launcher at all for other applications. So you can choose if you either want to allow multiple applications or if you want to just run a single application. It supports custom background image for personalization. So we've got a very plain image here, but you can have, a customer logo. Title bar, which you can see at the top here, can be configured to display the device serial number or MAC address. So that can be useful to show the serial number, for example. If you're in user mode, by default, it will disable the ADB, so it prevents people from pushing applications onto the device through ADB. And it has an admin mode, which is controlled by a configurable password. And in order to log into admin, you hit the menu button, enter the admin password. And once you're in admin mode, then you can control the settings of EHS, and you can also control which applications are seen on the home screen. You can also automatically configure devices by pushing a copy of enterprise home screen.xml, which is its configuration file, and by default that goes in the enterprise user folder so that it's persistent over an enterprise reset. So you can choose, either you can manually change settings, or you can modify the XML file and push that onto the device in order to change the configuration. So we've got a few utilities that we've put together to try and make it kind of easier to use and demonstrate EHS, really purely for test and demo. So you wouldn't use this in the field in a live application, but there's an application created by my colleague James Swinton Bland, which is default launcher toggle.apk, and that will basically just allow you to toggle between EHS and the default Android launcher. So what it does basically is to enable and disable EHS just from the menu, which is useful if you're doing demonstrations, because quite often you need to go back to the full Android launcher in order to change a setting or to install other applications, for example. So in the configurations that we're looking at here, that's added by default into the tools menu. Obviously, you wouldn't leave that on the menu if you actually push this out to a customer deployment. Another utility is called a10info.apk, and what that's doing is it's writing the key information of the device, like the OS build and the model, onto the default wallpaper image, which is being used by EHS. So it's kind of doing a watermark of the device information onto the wallpaper image, which is useful because if you're running a support desk and somebody calls up with an issue, then you can immediately check what OS version and what device they're running, and you've got the serial number also at the top of the screen. Whoops, here as well, so you can easily identify a particular device. Again, probably more useful for devices which are not under EMM control, because with an EMM remote control session, you'd have this information anyway. But for non-EMM devices, then that's useful to have that available. So what the next section is talking about really is a method to easily create an EHS configuration. And the way it works is we firstly install the required apps, enable ADB, connect through a USB cable, and just run this genehs batch file. And that basically will build a completely persistent EHS profile for that set of applications which were already pre-installed. So once you've done that, in order to deploy that profile onto another device, again, you just enable ADB, connect via a USB, you run the APK copy batch file, which has been built by this process here. So it builds this APK copy, and it will copy the APKs, the applications, to persistent storage. And it also builds an APK persist.xml file, which will persist the installation of these apps and the EHS and everything else. And then you can do an enterprise reset, and you'll see that it will basically reinstall everything, including EHS. And so it's basically taken any effort out of creating an EHS lockdown configuration, because it's building that for you. And so I'm going to run a demonstration here where we're going to install Enterprise Browser, going to create a persistent configuration using the EHS, genehs.bat file. We're going to copy the configuration to the device using the generated batch file and generated XML. And then we can, I don't know if we have time to do an enterprise reset, but you have to trust me that if you do an enterprise reset, it will reinstall automatically the applications and the same EHS configuration. So we just drop out of here and clean up the background. So if I show you my device at the moment, if you remember back, we had already installed Enterprise Browser .printer setup app. Let's just clean it up a bit and remove that file explorer because I don't really want that. So I've got those applications already installed. So all I need to do really is to go to my, my folder, and then just run genehs.bat, and that should then basically pull down those applications and back them up, and it will then install the utilities I was talking about, like the A10 info utility, and it will allow me to, well, it basically then installs EHS and does the watermarking of the image, the wallpaper image, which you can see there. So it's done the full installation. It allows me to enter the name of the project. So let's call this Talk 1. And you can also, optionally, there's an option to enable use whitelist. If I check that option, it will also put in the XML, which will automatically build the whitelist for those applications. So that's a good idea to do that if you're deploying, because it will then prevent any additional apps from being installed. So it's really the same process we talked about earlier, but built into this generating process. So I just hit process, tells me it's created a folder called devtalk1, and it then says just run apk copy and process apk persist in order to persist that installation. So although I've got this already now installed on my device, it's not going to persist at the moment. If I just do an enterprise reset, this will be cleared down. So to persist it, I have to then go into that folder that's been generated. It should be devtalk1. And if I look in there, you can see these files. So these APK files are my applications that it's backed up. And then I've got the enterprise home screen.xml, which is my configuration file for these apps. And I've got the APK copy and APK persist. If I look at those with a file browser, a file editor, then you can see the contents. So you can see here, it's just pushing the APK files into the enterprise user folder. Those are the ones which are I had installed previously, and then it's also adding the utilities that I talked about as well. One of those utilities, this one here, will allow me to automatically apply a license for Enterprise Browser. So that's quite useful in that it basically just looks on the enterprise user folder for a license.txt file. And if that license file contains a valid license for Enterprise Browser, it will apply that so that you don't have to do anything else other than just make sure you've got your activation ID in a license file on the enterprise user folder, and it's automatic from that point onwards. So it's a really simple way of persistently reinstalling licenses. It's also pushing the enterprise home screen. That's the EHS application itself. that's the application to toggle the launcher, and then that's the wallpaper image. So if I want to change the wallpaper image, this is taking a default image. If I want to create a custom image, then I can just take, I go back to this folder. That's a modified image here, which I can just copy into my folder, my project folder. So if you look at that, this is an image that contains the developer's logo. So all I need to do is just to remove that path, and then I can say, oops, just going to exit that. Okay, let's leave that there. I'll just show you quickly the APK persist XML as well. So in here, basically, the important points of this are that it's going to reinstall the applications. It's disabling the screen lock because you don't really need that with EHS. And it's also going to disable safe mode as well, which is useful because it will prevent that as any kind of backdoor. And at the end of it, it installs EHS and it will persist the whole configuration. So to show you that being installed, if I show the screen of the device again. So I just run APK copy to copy those onto the device. And hopefully you should see that the background will change. So when I actually process the XML, which I'm going to do, let's do that through this utility. So I'll select that XML, push it onto the device, start stage now, process the XML. What you should see hopefully is that the background will change to that modified logo background. So it's going to take a while to process that, because what it's doing basically, as we saw with the XML, is it's reinstalling all the applications. So it takes a while to do that. But it should complete in a few seconds, hopefully. And I should mention, I already had a license file on this device, which was left over from when I was testing earlier. So what you'll see is that Enterprise Browser is actually licensed, because the license file contains the activation ID for Enterprise Browser. And as part of the startup, you look at the Enterprise homescreen.xml configuration, which is this one. You can see in here that we're running the license installer app as part of the automatic launch of applications when EHS starts up. So that app, when it launches, it's going to go out to the enterprise user folder. It's going to look for the license.txt file. If it finds the file, it will then try and apply that license over the cloud connection to the cloud server. And provided it's a valid license, then it will apply that. The interesting thing about licensing is if you have one activation ID in the license.txt, then it will also install any other licenses which are associated with that device. So if you already licensed the device previously for, say, PTT Express, you only need to apply one license code for the Enterprise Browser, and it will automatically pull down the license for PTT Express as well. So makes it really simple. It only has to have a single valid activation ID in that license.txt file, and then everything else is automatic. So my device is timed out. But, I think you should just see as that boots up that it will switch to the logo and should also see that if I run Enterprise Browser, whoops, that's the license reinstall. You can see it said license installed. So if I run Enterprise Browser, I should have a licensed version. You can see there. So I think we're just about out of time, but just to go to the last slide. That was a very quick run through. Hopefully that gives you some idea of the options we have. We do have a lot of options for locking down devices. Don't have to use them all, but certainly start to consider, if you're not already using them, consider using them, because they will make our devices much more secure. I think we're out of time for live Q&A, but if you have any questions about what I've been through, then please submit them through the developer conference portal, and I'll try and respond as soon as possible, depending on time zones and so on. But I will get back to you if you post a question there. So that was it from me. Thanks for attending, and speak to you soon.